In his book, The Philosophy of Horror, Noel Carroll describes how a monster, in the fictional sense, is often a beguiling mixture of opposite features or opposite concepts. Features, in other words, which our culture deems to be incompatible, but which a monster satisfies nonetheless. Most obviously, we consider the features of being alive and being dead to be opposites. No thing can have both. Yet such monsters as ghosts and zombies have both. Or consider the features of being animate and being inanimate. We deem those to be opposites, but such monsters as haunted houses or haunted cars or haunted anything have both. Or consider the features of being human and being a beast. We consider those to be incompatible as well, yet such monsters as lycanthropes, wendigos, and foxwomen satisfy both. Finally, and most importantly for the purposes of this video, consider the opposite features of being innocent on one hand and being malevolent on the other. By combining these features, we get such monsters as evil clowns, evil children, evil pets, and evil toys. And it's on this lattermost example that our adventure will focus today. Welcome to PhD&D, everyone. I'm Dr. Bowers, and today we're going to discuss the Ravenloft Domain of Dread called Odiare, a name that means hatred. As usual, in my Ravenloft videos, I'm going to go over what the domain is, provide some examples of media that help us get an imaginative grip on the domain and the adventure that we're going to sketch out, and then sketch out an adventure. In this case, the adventure will be for low levels, taking PCs from levels 2 up to level 5. That is, they will finish the adventure at level 4 and level up to 5 at the end. So let's get started. What is the domain of Odiare? Well, at first glance, Odiare may seem to be an ordinary human village with Renaissance-era technology. Visitors, however, soon find a complete absence of adults, and even worse, an abundance of malicious animated toys. These toys are led by a wooden marionette named Maligno, who is brought to life by the fell wishes of the town's toy maker Giuseppe. Maligno and his toys will stop at nothing to kill every adult who enters the town. Woe to any travelers, therefore, who wander to Odiare. So Odiare is a domain of killer toys and also potentially killer children. Because, personally, I don't care for violence against children in my adventures, however, we're gonna lean more on the former and ignore the latter. In other words, as we sketch out an adventure, it's going to focus on the PCs fighting toys and not on the PCs fighting children. Now, when it comes to getting an imaginative grip on fighting toys and evil toys and also the horror of becoming a toy, we're going to touch on that in the adventure, there is no shortage of media. There are lots and lots of movies and stories and games, in other words, that feature killer toys, killer dolls, killer marionettes, and so on. You can go all the way back to the 1929 film The Great Gabbo, about a ventriloquist who splits his personality between himself and his dummy, or the vignette, The Ventriloquist's Dummy, from the 1945 anthology horror film Dead of Night. There are a couple of horrific Twilight Zone episodes, the 1962 episode The Doll and the 1964 episode Caesar and Me, as well as the vignette Amelia from 1975's film The Trilogy of Terror. You've got the 1978 film Magic starring Anthony Hopkins, the 1988 film Child's Play and all of the Chucky films that came after, the 1989 film The Puppet Master and all the Puppet Master films that came after. You've got the 2007 film Dead Silence, and that doesn't even begin to cover all of them. You've got the violent toys in the eponymous Robin Williams film Toys, you've got the evil toys from Nightmare Before Christmas, you've got Slappy the Dummy from the Goosebumps book Night of the Living Dummy, and so on. Because we have such an abundance of sources, we're going to be judicious in selecting which ones are most helpful for influencing how we think of our adventure. The first I want to recommend is the 1987 film Dolls, directed by Stuart Gordon. This is a short, well-paced horror movie about a group of people that get lost in the rain and have to stay the night in a spooky old mansion filled with killer dolls. There's some great stop-motion animation, the direction is well-paced, the kill scenes are fun, and unlike many horror movies about killer dolls or killer toys, this one has a kind of fairy tale feel to it. A couple of characters are spared the violence of the toys because of their virtue, and that's kind of nice. There's almost a happy ending to it. I also recommend the 2015 horror film Krampus, directed by Michael Dougherty. If you want some scary toys, take a look at the toys in this film. I'm especially thinking of the angel doll, the Jack-in-the-Box, and the teddy bear. In addition, Krampus also takes place during Christmas, and this is an unexpected but sensible common thread that runs through a lot of killer toy movies. A lot of them take place during Christmas or Yuletide. Speaking of which, I also recommend the book by E.T.A. Hoffmann, The Nutcracker and the Mouse King, or I guess in the original German, Der Nussknacker und der Mauskönig. Most famously adapted in the ballet by Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky, one reason why I recommend this book is because of the monsters at the very beginning. Yes, the monsters. I'm talking about the seven-headed king of rats who is intelligent and wears a set of crowns and wields a saber and commands a grotesque army of intelligent rats. It all takes place at the very beginning of the story, but it's a fun sort of encounter that we're going to borrow for our adventure. If you were looking for a cinematic adaptation of the Nutcracker story, you could take the Nutcracker Fantasy from 1979. It's a weird stop-motion Japanese film. And while it doesn't feature a 7-headed mouse king, that was probably too much for stop-motion animation, it does have a 2-headed mouse queen who is pretty scary. I also recommend the 2003 album The Puppet Master by King Diamond. This may seem like a strange recommendation, but the story that the album tells is one that almost perfectly fits the adventure that we're going to sketch out. Like all King Diamond albums, this one tells a horror story, and the constituent tracks are different chapters in the story. And we learn about a couple who visit a puppet show during Christmas and are beguiled by the realistic, albeit macabre, nature of the marionettes. They later succumb to a horrible fate, becoming marionettes themselves. And it's all a bit of spooky fun. In addition, King Diamond has actually recorded a video in which he just tells the story.
As the blood goes in, I feel my skin tingle.
And I have to say it's pretty delightful. Finally, and most importantly, there is the 1993 2nd edition Ravenloft Adventure module by Bruce Nesmith called The Created. You might recognize Bruce's name because of his work on other Ravenloft products and Dungeons & Dragons products, or because of his work on the Elder Scrolls and Skyrim. We're going to change a couple parts of this adventure, but the adventure that we run will be closely based on it. Speaking of which, let's sketch out our adventure. Our adventure takes place across 3 acts. In the first act, PCs are level 2, and they solve a murder mystery and eventually get attacked by carrionette monsters. The chapter ends with the PCs losing control of their bodies and having their consciousness transferred into the bodies of toys. In Act 2, the PCs at level 3 find themselves trapped in a toy shop, and they must find a way to not only escape, but also find out what happened to them and how to get their old bodies back. And finally, in Act 3, at level 4, the PCs eventually track down their bodies, regain them, and confront and hopefully defeat the puppet Maligno, who has led the entire attack that bedevils the PCs in this adventure. Now, before we begin, it's worth saying a couple of things about the most important monster in this adventure, namely the carrionette. The carrionette is one of these monsters that tells a story in its statistics. If you take a look at the carrionette's abilities, you may note that it can swap souls with people that it strikes with its needle. These killer toys throw silver needles at their enemies, and if their needles strike the enemy and that enemy fails a charisma save, they have their consciousness transferred into the body of the toy, and the carrionette's consciousness transfers into the body of the victim. That is not a mere status change. That is not like getting the poisoned condition or being knocked prone. Having your consciousness transfer into the body of a toy is a really exciting and horrific turn of events. Because of this, our adventure is going to pivot on such a change. So let's begin at Act 1. It is Yuletide. There is snow covering the ground, and everyone is in a joyous mood, giving gifts to each other and singing carols. But not all is as joyous as it should be. The PCs, at level 2, have been asked by the Constable of Odiare, a man named Alfredo, to help solve a recent murder. Now, as in the module The Created, our adventure is going to take place as Odiare becomes a domain of dread. In other words, we will begin with Odiare as an ordinary human village, and it will become an evil toy-haunted ruin by the end. Anyway, the adventure begins with the PCs being asked by Alfredo, the constable, to help solve a murder. The murder occurred at a private residence, and here's what happened. A man named Olmo was at home with his wife Maria and his daughter Celia. Celia has a beloved teddy bear that she just calls Teddy, and Teddy was recently animated by fell powers. Teddy is actually a carrionette. Fortunately, however, Teddy poses no threat to Celia, just as carrionettes in general do not pose any threats to children. Olmo, however, saw Celia talking with Teddy and saw Teddy move on his own. Horrified, Olmo cried out, and the Teddy immediately pretended to be an ordinary toy. Yet, as soon as Olmo calmed himself and went to bed, and as soon as Celia was asleep as well, Teddy crept over into Olmo's room, broke a window, took a shard of glass, and then slashed open Olmo's throat. Teddy then hid the shard of glass under the bed and ran quickly back to Celia's room. When the PCs arrive, Maria is beside herself with grief, Olmo's body is on his bed, and Celia skulks drearily in the corner with Teddy and a couple of other toys. When it comes to solving the murder mystery, PCs have a variety of clues. If they investigate the broken window, for instance, they will discover that it is broken from the inside and that it's only missing a single shard of glass. If they look under the bed, they will find that shard of glass covered in blood and also a tuft of brown fur. In addition, PCs may find a set of bloody small paw prints leading out of Olmo's room into the hallway. At first, those paw prints may seem like cat paw prints, and we can even allow Olmo's family to have a cat. Getting a hold of the cat, however, may require an animal handling check or some other check, but if the PCs get a hold of the cat, they can verify that the tuft of brown fur does not belong to the cat, nor are the paw prints the cat's. The PCs, of course, may get it into their head to examine the teddy bear, and if they do, they will also need to succeed on a certain kind of charisma check. Celia doesn't want to just hand Teddy over, especially to strangers, and so the PCs will need to convince her, persuade her, deceive her, or intimidate her. Once they get a hold of the bear, the PCs can verify that the brown fur seems to come from the teddy bear, and the teddy bear has some blood on its paws. As soon as they realize this, Teddy will spring to life, jump out of the PC's hands, snarl and snap with visible fangs, and then rush out of a door or a window. Just at that moment, a chorus of screams fill the streets outside. Assuming the PCs run outside, they find the streets in chaos. Scores upon scores of killer toys are attacking adult villagers, pulling them to the ground, stabbing them, ramming them, choking them, torturing them in the way that gremlins might from the original film. And presumably now, it is up to the PCs to put a stop to it. To give the scene some structure, we can have a few different set pieces. For the first set piece, you could have 4 carrionettes carrying a pitchfork and using it like a battering ram to attack the PCs. We'll let all 4 carrionettes attack together, and we will give them a multi-attack with as many strikes per attack as there are carrionettes. So when starting out, this organized swarm has 4 attacks per turn, but once one of the carrionettes is dead, it will only have 3 attacks, and so on. When there's just 1 carrionette left, it drops the pitchfork and just attacks as a normal carrionette. Second, we could have a half dozen little tin soldiers walk up to the PCs and fire their needles at them from apparent muskets. Or if you don't have muskets in your setting, say bows and arrows, crossbows. We could also have a collection of carrionettes that look like stuffed animals riding a rocking horse, sliding down the streets. Give the rocking horse the statistics of a draft horse, just change its creature type to construct. And finally, you might have a trio of carrionettes riding in a toy hot air balloon floating aloft. Now, as the fight progresses, or rather as these fights progress, the carrionettes will make increasing use of their needles. And DMs should feel free to send wave after wave of carrionettes at the PCs until every PC has been both struck with a needle and also failed the ensuing charisma save. When a PC fails a charisma save, just mention that they feel dizzy and don't do anything else. It's only after every PC fails the charisma save that everything goes black, the PCs lose consciousness, they level up to 3, and we proceed to Act 2. In Act 2, the PCs awaken in a birdcage that is suspended high above the floor of a toy shop. It's actually Giuseppe's toy shop. He's the toy maker who created the carrionettes. And although he cannot be found here, some of his carrionettes can. Now, when the PCs first regain consciousness, it should seem to them that they are in the castle of a giant or some huge place. All the furniture seems enormous, they are in an enormous birdcage after all, but as soon as they look around at each other or examine themselves, they will see that they have the bodies of toys. So indeed, it is not that they are trapped in an incredibly large place, but that they themselves have been rendered incredibly small. Here, I would make sure to use a variety of toys. Maybe one of the PCs is a plush bear, maybe one of them is a porcelain ballerina, maybe one of them is a nutcracker doll, one of them is a wind-up toy. Be creative. But here is something important, and here we are going to mechanically deviate from the original adventure. The PCs have been turned into dolls, yes, but we are not going to give them new statistics. We are not going to change their ability scores or anything like that. Instead, we are going to change everything else relative to the PCs. We will say that the PC size is tiny, and instead of describing things in terms of 5-foot squares, we can just describe them in terms of 5-inch squares. Likewise for the PC's combat reach, spell range, and so on. If the PCs encounter a rat or a spider and have to fight it, we will simply give the rat the statistics of a dire wolf, give the spider the statistics of a giant spider, and so on. Again, we're not going to force the PCs to play with new characters that have doll-like statistics. We're going to let them play their regular characters and just describe everything else as gigantic. Give everything else gigantic statistics instead of giving the PCs tiny statistics, in other words. We will also let the PCs have access to all of their spells and abilities, although they are missing their equipment. Fortunately, however, if they search around the toy shop, they should be able to find equivalent equipment. A toy saber instead of a regular sword, for instance, and so on. Now, there are 3 major points to this act. The first of which is that the PCs must find some way to get down from the birdcage that they're in. Given their size, it's the equivalent of a 50-foot drop. It's something that the PCs could survive if they just fell, but they would be damaged considerably. So they need to figure out maybe how to climb down, use their spells, or work out some kind of a plan. Once the PCs get down, next, they need to find out what happened to them and how to get their old bodies back. Consequently, they should look around the toy shop for some clues. As for a map of the toy shop, you might look online for various fan creations. In particular, look at the maps that people made for Blinsky's Toy Shop in Curse of Strahd. There's a couple of maps in particular I like by some people called Dungeon Madams. I think that's their name on Patreon. Anyway, PCs can find Giuseppe's notebook on his workbench. The journal rests open amongst discarded toy parts, and it describes how, using an eldritch ritual from an occult grimoire, Giuseppe wished life into one of his fondest creations, a toy named Figlio. And indeed, Figlio came to life, but he turned out to be malicious, evil, and cruel. He immediately changed his name to Maligno and forced Giuseppe to make more such puppets. Dozens more. Giuseppe's journal describes how the carrionettes use enchanted silver needles in order to switch souls with the victims that they strike. And he also importantly describes how this process can be reversed if only the original souled carrionette strikes their old body with the same sort of needle. Once the PCs read and understand this journal, they should realize what they have to do. Find some of those silver needles, track down their old bodies, and hit their old bodies with those needles. As for the needles, they are actually hidden somewhere in the toy shop inside of a jack-in-the-box, embedded in the doll's pincushion-like head. The jack-in-the-box is hostile, however. It has the statistics of a pentadrone, and it springs out in an attempt to surprise the PCs, along with some giant spider minions it has. The PCs can collect a plethora of silver needles once they defeat the jack-in-the-box, and then they have only to escape the toy shop. They could try to break a window and jump out. They could try to divide into teams. Half of the PCs depress the thumb latch on the door and the other half pull the door open. Again, like getting down from the birdcage, there are a few different things the PCs could try to figure out. Now, amidst these tasks, the PCs may have some random encounters in the toy shop. Not only may they encounter other hostile toys, but they may also encounter a collection of intelligent rats. Narratively speaking, these are cranium rats, and they are also the product of Giuseppe's experiments. But we're going to give each rat the statistics of a wolf, and we'll say that there is a two-headed rat leader who has the statistics of a dire wolf, but with an intelligence of 18, and since it has two heads, it has advantage on perception checks, wisdom saves, and intelligence saves. As a boss monster, we might also give it legendary resistance and legendary actions, and struggles with these rats could be interspersed as the PCs attempt to find out what happened to them and escape the toy shop. Once they escape the toy shop, they level up to 4, and we proceed to Act 3. In Act 3, the PCs, still in the body of toys, make it outside and witness that the snow-covered ground is tranquil, despite being covered in dead adult bodies. A small amount of exploration or a perception check should reveal that a great deal of noise and light is coming from a building at the city's center. It's the theater, a place where Giuseppe used to give puppet shows. If the PCs approach and look through the theater windows, they see that all of the town's children are sitting in the theater watching a series of puppet shows put on by the carrionettes. If the PCs enter through the front doors, they can bluff their way past other carrionettes and make their way backstage. If they do so, or if the PCs simply enter the theater through the back doors, they find their original bodies standing around an old man who is tied to a chair. That old man is Giuseppe. Also backstage, strutting back and forth and monologuing angrily, is the puppet Maligno, leader of the carrionettes. He gloats that the village will be reborn, that Odiare will be a true paradise where there are only the innocence of toys and the innocence of children and none of the disgusting meddling of adults. Giuseppe will try to contradict him or speak up, but Giuseppe is gagged, and Maligno will gloat over this. Now, the PCs can wait a few moments for Maligno to leave and go out on stage, or they can just attack their old bodies with silver needles there and then. Tactically, it's probably better to do the former, but either way, the PC's bodies will fail their saving throws as soon as they are struck with the PC's silver needles, and as long as the PCs get a hit in, they will regain their old bodies. At that point, they can untie Giuseppe, who will tell them what happened, and Giuseppe will urge them to stop Maligno at all costs. As for how, well, the PCs have a number of options. They might just rush on stage and attack Maligno and the carrionettes, but if they do that, they could upset a mob of children, and unlike a mob of carrionettes, the PCs cannot just attack a mob of children. Another option, which Giuseppe might suggest, is to set fire to the theater, raise an alarm, and stand outside, attacking carrionettes who leave, but not children. Another option might be to, turn back into carrionettes, go on stage and try to convince the children that Maligno is a bad toy, and that they are good toys, and they should listen to Giuseppe. Again, there are a lot of different ways that this adventure might be resolved. Regardless, the PCs must defeat Maligno and the last of the carrionettes. I think we should max out Maligno's hit points, give him legendary resistance, give him legendary action, actions, all of the things that are necessary to draw out the fight long enough to make it fun and memorable as a boss fight, and then, assuming that the PCs prevail, they level up to 5 and the adventure comes to an end. Now, from here on out, the town of Odiare is forever trapped in the Shadowfell. The killer toys are likely to return, along with Maligno. However, for now, the domain's borders are open, and the PCs can flee into the mist. Who knows where they may end up, who knows what their other adventures may be, but this one has come to a conclusion. And that is our adventure in Odiare. What do you think? Would your PCs find it exciting to be turned into toys and to have to get their old bodies back? Do you think it would be fun to run this as a one-shot around the winter holiday season? Is there anything that you would add to spice up this adventure? And how would you portray Maligno's personality? I'm imagining him as a maniacal creature like Lord Kukuruku from Unico in the Island of Magic, but you may have some other ideas. Let me know in the comments. Thanks very much for watching. As always, don't forget to do all the internet things. Click like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell icon if you want notifications about updates on this channel. And thanks very much.